Hi and welcome to Shot of Justice, the Peach Pit Report, a story of sweet, simmering revenge for women who know the price of silence. The Waring blender killed my husband, not directly, of course. Arthur didn't electrocute himself whipping up a daiquiri. No, it was the sight of my mother's vintage avocado green Waring blender sitting behind the smudged glass of Cash at Quick Pawn on 3rd Street that finally stopped his heart, or rather, the implication of it, the undeniable proof of the lie that had been our life for God knows how long. I'd gone in looking for my grandmother's pearl ring, the one with the tiny chip Arthur swore he'd taken to be resized for our 30th anniversary 6 months ago. He'd been vague, distracted ever since. The ring wasn't there, but the blender, a relic from 1972 with the little chip on the base where Mom dropped it, retrieving pickle relish for a church picnic, staring back at me like an accusation. Arthur, my Arthur, the meticulous accountant, the man who balanced our checkbook to the penny every Saturday morning, the man who lectured our daughter about fiscal responsibility until her eyes glazed over, pawning my dead mother's blender, the sheer desperate vulgarity of it hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen, the cheap fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the sour smell of stale sweat and despair clinging to the air, staring at that ridiculous appliance. It wasn't about the blender. It was the violation, the secret, the terrifying question, what else? I didn't confront him immediately. Eleanor Harper, at 63, wasn't prone to hysterics. Shock settled over me like a thick, suffocating blanket. I drove home the familiar streets of Cedar Hill, Ohio, blurring past my windshield, our neat colonial house on Maple Drive, the one we'd bought when Sarah was 5, with its carefully tended rose bushes Arthur pruned religiously, suddenly felt like a stage set, a facade. I found him in his den, surrounded by papers that usually signified important work. His face, usually ruddy from his evening scotch, was unnaturally pale. He looked diminished, fragile. He saw me, saw the look on my face. Not anger, just a profound, chilling stillness. "Eleanor?" His voice was thin. "What is it?" I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said, "I saw Mother's blender at Cash It Quick." I watched the color drain completely from his face, leaving it the shade of old ashes. His hand fluttered towards his chest. "Arthur?" The name felt strange on my tongue. He didn't answer, just gasped. A horrible, wet sound, his eyes wide with a terror that wasn't just physical. He slumped forward onto the meticulously organized spreadsheets. By the time the paramedics arrived, summoned by my numb, automatic dialing of 911, he was gone. Coronary thrombosis. Massive, brought on by extreme stress, they said later. The irony wasn't lost on me. The stress of being caught, not the stress of the crime itself. The aftermath was a blur of well-meaning neighbors, casseroles multiplying like tributes to the dead, and Sarah flying in from Seattle, red-eyed and bewildered. "Mom, what happened? Dad seemed fine." That's when the real excavation began. The blender was just the first shovelful of dirt removed from the carefully landscaped grave of Arthur Harper's secret life. Sorting through his den, my den now, I supposed, felt like defusing a bomb. I found the locked filing cabinet first. The key? Taped to the underside of his middle desk drawer, the one he always cautioned me against disturbing. Inside, not client files or tax returns, but a nightmare. Bank statements. Our joint account bled nearly dry. Transfers large sums siphoned off for months. To where? Then I found the statements for accounts I never knew existed. Accounts in his name, only overdrawn. Penalties mounting. Credit card bills, dozens of them maxed out, some in his name, a few chillingly in my name, opened fraudulently, store cards from places I never shopped, loan applications denied, and then the pièce de résistance, the deed to a property, not a vacation cabin, a small dilapidated bungalow on the wrong side of town, purchased 2 years prior. The address made my blood run cold. It was near the old, defunct warehouse district, a notorious area. Why, what on earth possessed Arthur Harper, pillar of the Cedar Hill Savings Loan Advisory Board, to buy a rotting shack there? The answer came, not in documents, but in person. 3 days after the funeral, a woman appeared on my porch, late 40s, maybe early 50s, with tired eyes and bleached blonde hair showing dark roots, wearing a cheap, too-tight floral dress. She smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and desperation. "Mrs. Harper?" Her voice was raspy. "Yes, I'm Darlene Meeks." She shifted her weight, not meeting my eyes. I lived at 127 Sycamore Street, with Arthur. The world tilted. Lived with Arthur. The words hung in the fragrant spring air, absurd and monstrous. I see, I managed, my voice remarkably steady. And what can I do for you, Miss Meeks? She looked startled, then defiant. He promised, see? Promised he was going to leave you. Fix things. Said he was setting us up nice. Then he just stopped coming round last month. Phone disconnected. I went to his office. They said he'd passed. A flicker of something that might have been genuine grief crossed her face. He owed me money, rent, bills. He said it was all tied up, but soon he left me with nothing in that house. She gestured vaguely toward the direction of the warehouse district. The roof leaks. The furnace is shot. He said it was an investment, gonna flip it. Bullshit. It's a dump. Bank's gonna take it, and me and my boy, we got nowhere. Her son. Arthur had a mistress and financed her life, dragging us into ruin. And there was a child? The layers of betrayal settled, cold and heavy. I didn't invite her in. My sanctuary felt violated enough. He left nothing, Ms. Meeks, I said, the truth tasting like ash. Nothing but debts, mountains of them. He lied to you. He lied to everyone. Her face crumpled. Not just anger, but a profound weariness. She wasn't the villain. She was another victim of Arthur's grand deception. That son of a bitch, she whispered, a tear tracking through poorly applied foundation. What am I going to do? I closed the door gently, leaned against it. My knees gave way, and I slid to the cool hardwood floor. The carefully constructed life and the comfortable retirement we'd planned, the security, the respectability, was gone. Obliterated, not just by death, but by deceit. The humiliation was a living thing crawling under my skin. Cedar Hill was a small town. News like this, whispered over bridge tables and coffee clatches, would spread like wildfire. Poor Eleanor, duped, bankrupted, made a fool of by her dead husband and his. Floozy, anger when it finally came was a slow, deep burn, not a raging fire, but the relentless heat of a forge. It didn't consume me, it tempered me. Hysterics wouldn't rebuild my life. Wallowing wouldn't pay the mortgage that was now solely my burden on a house that felt like a mausoleum. Pity was a poison I refused to swallow. The first step was survival. I met with Arthur's bewildered, apologetic partner at the accounting firm. The firm itself was teetering. Arthur had borrowed client funds too. Small amounts, easily hidden until the whole rotten structure collapsed. I saw the fear in the partner's eyes, fear of scandal, of lawsuits. I didn't threaten. I simply stated facts. I needed a job, not charity, a job. Eleanor Harper, who hadn't worked outside the home in 35 years since Sarah was born, became the firm's receptionist bookkeeper. My old skills, organization, precision, a calm demeanor, were rusty but serviceable. The humiliation of answering phones for women who used to invite me to chair charity events was acute, but the anger banked beneath the surface fueled me. I learned new software, swallowed pride, and balanced books with a ferocious accuracy Arthur himself would have admired. Sarah wanted me to move to Seattle. Sell the house, Mom. Start fresh. But leaving felt like running away. Cedar Hill was my home. I wouldn't be driven out by Arthur's ghost or the town's whispers. I sold the pearls Arthur gave me for our 25th anniversary. I sold the antique silver service gathering dust in the dining room cabinet. I downsized everything, clipping coupons, learning the price of every single thing. The anger didn't fade. It crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. Arthur had stolen my past and my present security. I would claw back my future. But that wasn't enough. Justice in the legal sense was murky. Arthur was dead. Suing Darlene Meeks was pointless. She had nothing. The bankruptcy proceedings were a slow, grinding humiliation, stripping away assets, laying bare our poverty. The town watched. Some offered genuine kindness. Marge Henderson from next door, a widow herself, became a steadfast friend. Others, their curiosity was thinly veiled schadenfreude. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about hurting Darlene, though the thought of the child, an innocent boy named Tommy, complicated things. It wasn't about violence or screaming accusations. True revenge, the kind that could satisfy the deep, bruised ache within me, would be reclaiming my narrative, exposing the truth, not as a victim, but as the one who unearthed it. It would be survival, yes, but survival with a sting in its tail for Arthur's memory and the comfortable assumptions of Cedar Hill. The idea came slowly, nurtured during long evenings in my now sparse living room, listening to the silence Arthur had left behind. It sparked when I saw a flyer for the Cedar Hill Historical Society's annual project grant. They funded local history preservation, oral histories, digitizing archives, restoring landmarks. Usually it went to projects about the founding families or the old mill. What if I documented something else? Something raw, real, and painfully recent. The Peach Pit, deindustrialization, displacement, and the hidden costs in Cedar Hill, 1970 present. The title sounded academic, respectable. The Historical Society Committee, chaired by old Mrs. Pendleton, who always asked after Arthur with a pointed sympathy, would see a project about the economic shift when the canning factory closed. Worthy, dull, safe, they had no idea. The grant application was a masterpiece of selective truth. I outlined interviewing former factory workers, business owners impacted by the closure, families who had to leave. All true. I mentioned exploring the ripple effects on community services and housing. Also true. I didn't mention that my primary focus would be the specific area around Sycamore Street and the derelict warehouses. I didn't mention the bungalow at 127 Sycamore. I didn't mention Arthur Harper, CPA, or Darlene Meeks. I got the grant, $5,000, seed money for my sweet, slow-burning revenge. Armed with a decent digital recorder and a second-hand camera, I became an anthropologist of my own ruin. I started with the archives at the local library, meticulously researching the canning factory, the Cedar Hill Peach Pit, its boom years, its proud place in the town, its sudden, brutal closure in the late 80s. I tracked down former workers, old Mr. Peterson, his hands gnarled with arthritis, remembered the deafening roar of the lines, the sticky sweet smell of peaches that never washed off. Mrs. Ruiz, whose father had been a foreman, spoke of the vibrant community that evaporated overnight. Maple Drive, she said pointedly. They didn't feel it like we did on Sycamore. Then I went to Sycamore Street. I knocked on doors. I talked to people who stayed, people clinging to homes in need of repair, surrounded by decay. I talked about jobs lost, pensions vanished, the slow decline. I listened, really listened. They were wary at first, the well-dressed lady from Maple Drive, but my genuine interest, my own hidden layer of loss, though I kept that veiled, slowly won them over. I bought lemonade from kids on porches. I admired gardens struggling against neglect. And then, inevitably, my path led to 127 Sycamore. Darlene answered, looking more worn than before. Tommy, a skinny boy of about 10 with Arthur's serious eyes, peeked from behind her. Mrs. Harper? Darlene's voice was flat, guarded. Miss Meeks, I'm working on a project for the Historical Society about the neighborhood, the old factory days. Would you be willing to share your experiences? Or perhaps Tommy could tell me what it's like growing up here now. Suspicion warred with a flicker of something. Recognition? A shared sense of being outside the town's better circles? What's in it for us? She asked bluntly. $50 for an interview, I said, pulling cash from the grant fund. And Maybe telling your story helps, makes people see. The money decided it. We sat on her rickety porch. Tommy stayed inside watching TV. I turned on the recorder. She talked about the neighborhood, the noise from the few remaining struggling auto shops, the lack of decent stores, the kids hanging around with nothing to do. She talked about struggling to find work that paid enough. She talked about the house, the constant repairs it needed, the landlord who never fixed anything. The landlord? I prompted gently, my heart pounding. Dead, she said, bitterness sharpening her voice. Arthur Harper, she hesitated, the owner, promised the moon, fixed nothing, left me in this hole. She didn't elaborate on her relationship, and I didn't ask. The recorder captured the raw frustration, the feeling of being trapped and forgotten. She spoke of the town's indifference. Out of sight, out of mind, right? Unless they need cheap labor or a place to dump something. Her words were gold. Pure, unfiltered testimony of neglect, echoing the experiences of others on the street. I interviewed Tommy, too, briefly. He spoke softly about liking the old warehouse to explore, but wishing the park wasn't full of broken glass. I kept interviewing. I documented crumbling sidewalks, boarded-up storefronts juxtaposed with glossy new developments on the other side of town. I interviewed the overwhelmed head of the underfunded community center trying to serve the kids. I interviewed a social worker who spoke of the invisible poverty in pockets of Cedar Hill, all carefully framed within the context of the Peach Pit's closure and its long tail. The documentary took shape. Hours of footage, stories of resilience and hardship, the undeniable visual decay of Sycamore Street, and woven through it, subtly but unmistakably, the story of 127 Sycamore, the leaky roof shown in stark close-up, the condemned notice partially visible on the door. I'd helped Darlene navigate the violation notice anonymously paying for a critical furnace repair through a local charity. Not forgiveness, just keeping my subject stable. Darlene's voice, raspy and resigned. He promised, said it was an investment. For us, just lies, all lies, left us here. I never named Arthur directly in the narration. I didn't have to. Cedar Hill was small. People knew Arthur Harper owned property. People knew he died suddenly. People suspected. The documentary didn't scream scandal. It whispered it. It showed the human cost of greed and neglect, with Arthur Harper's fingerprints subtly, damningly all over one specific, poignant example. The editing was painstaking. I learned new software fueled by late nights and the simmering coal of my anger. Marge Henderson, bless her, became my confidant and test audience. Oh, Eleanor, she'd murmur, watching rough cuts, her eyes wide. It's powerful, it's heartbreaking. And that poor woman, and that boy? She never said Arthur's name, but the implication hung heavy. The premiere was held at the Cedar Hill Community Hall, funded by the Historical Society grant. Mrs. Pendleton beamed, expecting a dry tribute to the past. The hall was packed, grant supporters, history buffs, curious townsfolk, and, crucially, many of the people from Sycamore Street and surrounding areas. Darlene and Tommy sat near the back, Darlene looking uncomfortable in a clean dress, Tommy fidgeting. The lights dimmed. My carefully crafted narration began, calm, factual. The screen showed archival footage of the bustling Peach Pit factory, happy workers, crates of canned peaches, then the closure announcement in the local paper, then the slow fade to the present. Empty lots where houses once stood, the rusting hulk of a warehouse, Mr. Peterson's gnarled hands. The interviews flowed, the economic impact, the loss of community. Then the focus shifted to Sycamore Street. The camera lingered on potholes, faded paint, the tired faces of residents. And then 127 Sycamore, the sagging porch, the shot of the roof, and Darlene's voice clear and filled with weary betrayal. He promised, said it was an investment. For us. Just lies, all lies, left us here. A collective gasp rippled through the Maple Drive contingent. Heads swiveled, whispers erupted. Arthur Harper? That's Darlene Meeks? He owned that? He left her there? The film didn't stop. It showed Tommy kicking a stone past broken glass in the park. It showed the overwhelmed community center director. It ended with a montage of the neighborhood kids, Tommy among them, their faces hopeful yet uncertain, overlaid with the social worker's words. We forget these corners of our own town. We forget the people. Their struggles aren't ancient history. They're the direct result of choices made, opportunities lost, and sometimes promises broken. The final shot was a slow pullback from the peeling sign of the long-closed Peach Pit factory, dissolving into a present-day satellite map of Cedar Hill, highlighting the stark contrast between the thriving center and the blighted area around Sycamore Street. The words faded in. Who pays the price when the peaches are gone? Silence. Heavy, profound silence. Then applause started, not from the front, but from the sides and back. The residents of Sycamore Street, Darlene included, clapping hesitantly at first, then with growing strength. Others joined in. It wasn't thunderous. It was thoughtful, charged. Mrs. Pendleton looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. Several prominent faces wore expressions of profound discomfort. The QA was electric. People asked about the factory, but many more asked about Sycamore Street now. What can be done? Who owns those derelict properties? Is there help for families like the one in that house? I answered calmly, factually, directing questions about current neglect to the town council members squirming in the audience. I mentioned the specific code violations at 127 Sycamore, framing it as an example of systemic neglect. I never mentioned Arthur's name again. I didn't need to. The connection was seared into the town's consciousness. The fallout was immediate and deeply satisfying. The Cedar Hill Gazette, which had run a respectful but brief obituary for Arthur focusing on his professional standing, now ran a front-page story. Legacy of Neglect, Documentary Shines, Light on Cedar Hill's Forgotten Corner. It detailed the conditions on Sycamore Street and heavily featured the plight of 127 Sycamore and its occupants, mentioning the deceased owner, a local accountant, leaving little room for doubt. Editorials demanded action from the town council regarding neglected neighborhoods and slum landlords, even deceased ones. Arthur's carefully guarded secret was out, not as a tawdry affair, but as a story of profound financial irresponsibility and callous disregard. His reputation as the solid, dependable accountant was shredded. Whispers turned into open discussion. He bankrupted poor Eleanor, left that woman and child in that hovel, all that money gone. And for what? The pity directed at me shifted subtly. It was no longer just for the widow, but for the widow who had been wronged, who had uncovered the truth, and who was fighting back. There was a new respect, tinged with awe, and perhaps a little fear. Darlene became an unlikely temporary cause célèbre. Offers of help came in. A local handyman fixed her roof pro bono after the Gazette story. The community center started a tutoring program Tommy thrived in. The town, shamed into action, launched an initiative to address code violations in the area. Darlene didn't become my friend, but the hostility was gone. We shared a bond forged in the wreckage Arthur left behind. She saw the documentary not as an attack on her, but as the weapon against his legacy it was meant to be. He hated being embarrassed, she said to me once, a grim satisfaction in her eyes. This would have killed him all over again. It was the closest we came to acknowledging our shared vengeance. My revenge wasn't violent, it wasn't illegal, it was colder, sharper. I used truth. I used the very skills Arthur thought belonged to his world: research, documentation, presentation. I used the town's own institutions, the historical society, the press. I exposed him, not just as an adulterer, but as a hypocrite, a failure, and ultimately a man who inflicted real harm on the community he purported to serve. I tarnished his precious reputation beyond repair. I turned the pity directed at me into a weapon against his memory. The grant money was gone, but my job at the accounting firm became permanent. The partner, deeply shaken by the scandal but recognizing my competence and perhaps fearing what else I might document, offered me a better position handling internal books. It paid the bills. The house on Maple Drive was mine, free and clear after the bankruptcy finally concluded, stripped of luxuries but filled with a hard-won peace. I tended the roses Arthur had loved. They bloomed fiercely. Sarah understood finally. "Mom," she said, watching me plant new perennials where Arthur's prized and expensive ornamental grasses had been, "it's awful what he did. But what you did, it was kind of magnificent." She paused. "And scary." I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes for the first time in years. Sweetheart, sometimes the quietest revenge is the sweetest. It's not about rage, it's about setting the record straight. It's about reclaiming your life, one exposed truth at a time. I patted the earth firmly around a vibrant purple coneflower, and making sure the weeds of deception are well and truly dug out. The documentary, The Peach Pit Report, won a small regional historical preservation award. A copy sits on my bookshelf. Sometimes on quiet evenings I take it down, not to watch the whole thing, just to fast forward to that moment, the collective gasp in the community hall, the dawning horror on the comfortable faces, the sound of Darlene's voice echoing Arthur's betrayal for the whole town to hear. That moment when the carefully constructed facade of Arthur Harper, CPA, crumbled to dust. I don't feel hatred anymore, just a quiet, profound satisfaction, like the deep, resonant note after a perfectly struck bell. The taste of revenge, I discovered, isn't bitter. It's complex. It has the tang of tears, the grit of struggle, and underneath it all, a sweetness as rich and enduring as a perfectly preserved summer peach. It's the sweetness of survival, the sweetness of truth, the sweetness of a life reclaimed on my own terms long after anyone thought this particular story was over. At 65, Eleanor Harper was just getting started, and Cedar Hill would never look at a peach or a respectable facade quite the same way again.